Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the virtual book launch of Intelligence Isn't Enough, a Black Professional's Guide to Thriving in the Workplace by Carice Anderson. My name is Jennifer Malik. I'm the editor of the reading list, and we're hosting this launch tonight along with Jonathan Ball Publishers. I'm just going to introduce the author. Carice holds an MBA from Harvard University and has worked with and for top companies such as Deloitte, Google, the Alan Gray Orbis Foundation, and Bain & Company. At McKinsey & Company, Carice managed a leadership development program for Black professionals. Carice works for Korn Ferry, a global organizational strategy consulting firm, and in her role, she does executive coaching, consulting, and facilitation for top firms in the USA, Europe, and Africa. Her new book, Intelligence Isn't Enough, will empower young Black graduates entering the workforce and Black professionals already at work, teaching them not only how to survive, but also thrive in the corporate environment. Intelligence Isn't Enough is out now from Jonathan Ball Publishers, and it's available to buy at all good bookstores and online, and in fact on bad bookstores as well, if there is such a thing. Joining Carice tonight is a panel of Black professionals who will be discussing and unpacking the points raised in the book. The panel will be introducing themselves shortly. Please leave your questions about the book in the comment section wherever you're watching this video, on YouTube or on Facebook, as Carice and the panel will have time to answer some of those questions at the end of the session. So if while you're watching, if anything occurs to you, or if you have any questions, or if you'd like someone to unpack something a little bit more, just leave those comments as the talk is happening. And then at the end, I'll be coming back into the chat to pass those questions on to the panel and Carice. So without further ado, let me hand over to Carice and enjoy the conversation.
Thanks so much, Jennifer, for kicking us off. First off, I want to start by welcoming everybody to this conversation. From all of the chatter on social media, I feel like this is a long overdue conversation and one that a lot of people are excited to have. And number two, I want to thank my esteemed panelists for agreeing to participate in this conversation with me. I appreciate you all. You all are very busy executives doing big, important things at big, important companies. So I thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to have this conversation. So what I would like for us to do is for you all to introduce yourselves, and I am going to outline the order, and you can just go from one person to the next. So of course, it's going to be ladies first. So I'm going to start with Manai, then I'm going to Gopolang, then I'm going to Sbu, and then I'll go to Motlatsi. And one thing I want you all to obviously say your name, the company, and the role that you have now, but also why did you agree to participate in this panel? So if you could cover all of that in your intro, that would be fantastic. Thanks so much.
Cool. I'll go. I'm used to going first because of my surname. So I was always up top at school.
I'm right there with you. I'm Anderson, so I'm right there with you.
So hi, everyone. My name is Manai Aphane. I currently work at Old Mutual. I am a senior consultant there in organizational design. And why did I agree to be a part of this panel, Carice? Because it's a very real topic to me, and I think for a number of other Black professionals. And I think the more we can engage and share experiences, the more we can learn from each other. So yeah, I couldn't say no.
Great, and I'm Gopolang Ngale-Lekgetha. Yes, the one with the long surname. I'm now an executive head of marketing for Vodacom Business. And I think I really wanted to join this conversation because it's something that we all talk about, you know, on the sidelines, at home with our friends, but we've never really had an occasion, or I've never really had an opportunity to really speak to a wider audience and just share experiences, right? Because we've all been through some stuff, and I'm sure it would be interesting to hear what our panelists have to say.
Thanks, Gopolang. Sorry, everyone. Hi, my name is Sbu Ngwane. I'm the Global Markets Executive in charge of Asia Pacific for Discovery. The reason why I wanted to partake in this conversation was really because we often feel like we go through things alone. Our perspectives at times are very myopic, very siloed. And I thought it'd be very interesting to hear from the other panelists and hear from you, Carice, having written the book. But I think also what's very important is to learn and impart knowledge. I learned a lot from those who have gone before me, and hopefully I can share some wisdom to those who are to come behind me. So that's it.
Hi, thank you very much. Thanks, Sbu. So I'm Motlatsi Mkalala. I'm the executive head for main markets for Standard Bank South Africa. And I think so. Why I'm interested in this topic is, it's driven from the point that I actually joined Standard Bank as a grad. So all the way, and I've never worked anywhere else but Standard Bank. But I think, the experience that I have of choosing one employer and staying with one employer, I thought it would be quite an interesting way to share some of the learnings of what actually propelled that story. So yeah, I think that was one of the reasons why I chose to join.
Thanks so much, everybody, for introducing yourselves. I mean, I do want to, acknowledge the fact that, I did stalk you all on LinkedIn, and I've seen some of the other places that you've worked. So, I mean, across this panel, people have worked at Unilever, IBM, E&Y, McKinsey, Deloitte, Oracle, and obviously, you all are working for some of the biggest brands, global brands, Pan-African brands, and you're representing financial services, telco, healthcare, and banking as well. So I think we've got, I like that there's a nice little mix of industries across the panel as well. So tell me, I just want to take it back, and I'll tell you the reason I'm asking this question. The question is, tell me where you grew up, and when you think about what most of the people in your immediate family did for a living, what was it? And the reason I'm asking this question is, sometimes I think we as Black people, we look at other successful Black people who are maybe further along and we're like, oh, she must have gone to a private school. She must have gone to a Model C. She must have grown up wealthy. We make these assumptions about people's backgrounds without really knowing where people have come from. And so I think that's why I wanted people to understand, where did you all grow up? What did your parents do? I mean, I'll start. I grew up in a small suburb of a really, kind of small state in the US, right? And everybody in my family was like teachers, social workers, ministers. So I was the first person in my family to major in business and the first person to work in the business space. So that is part of the reason, like when I started working, I had no clue what I was doing. And the worst part was I didn't even know what I didn't know, right? And I had nobody around me who could really help me navigate the space that I was, starting in. And so that's why I think it's important to start with that question. So I'm going to go backwards. We're going to go in the reverse order. So Motlatsi, tell me, where you grew up and kind of what were most of the people in your family, what did they do for a living? Just so people have a sense of you as a person and your background.
Cool. I grew up in a township called Tembisa. So primary school, high school, I went there. So my high school, I'll challenge everyone to say it was in Valley High School. And yeah, so, and in actual fact, what it means is, it means that in Valley, it's something rare. That's what it means. So I went to that high school. Also, there was a high school that was notorious as well of, breeding gangs and so forth. And so also wanted to sort of navigate life through that. But from a family point of view, I was the second person to get matric. So the first person was my brother. That is all the generations of my family, particularly from my mother's side, because that's who raised me. And then the first person actually to go to university. Even when I went to corporate and the kind of job that I do, nobody has ever, done that. I mean, everybody, either they were a domestic worker. I mean, my mother was a domestic worker. My father was a, blue collar worker working for a factory. And yeah, my aunts and uncles, the same story. Either, you're a builder or you're a domestic worker. So that's where I grew up. So I have not had my career aspiration have not come from home. So they came from the place of work, but also some of the, angels that I came across along the way. So that's where my inspiration came from.
Awesome. Spuda.
Motlatsi, I like hearing that you're a boy from the township. I myself was I'm Durban born and raised, come from the township of Imlazi, which is in south of Durban. Because of the violence back in kind of the late 80s, early 90s, we tried to get out as quickly as we could. The area we were in was actually quite notorious. There was a very notorious kind of warlord who ran that particular section. So we needed to get out. I remember there were times when, to get to school, my dad would drive us to school, and we'd have to cower in the back with a blanket over us, because if anybody saw you going to school, then those were problems. So we moved from there, settled in a very small, quite humble suburb called Seaview, to which we still live there, over 20 years later. At least the folks do. My dad started off his career as a teacher, and he always tells the story of how my grandmother would pay as much as she could and scrounge around and make sure that he got his education. But as soon as he became a teacher, then she was like, how are you going to go and play with other kids, the kids of other children's futures? I mean, you're such a young, scrawny little boy going to teach kids. And he always used to laugh, saying, you paid for my education. You've been paying for me to study teaching for these years, and now all of a sudden I'm a teacher, and you ain't got no faith in me. So that was my dad. He ended up, doing a number of jobs until he finally became a medical aid broker. So I think it's quite ironic that I'm actually working with one of the biggest competitor of the company that he worked for over 20 years. My mother was a nurse, and she worked her way up to become a tutor, and she used to teach the eye. She's actually recently retired in December. She's enjoying staying at home. And it was similar kind of stories for most of the family members. So lots of teachers, lots of nurses in the family. I think honest, modest, hard workers. And that's it.
Yeah, I think, so I grew up in also a township called Temba in Hammanskraal. I'm sure those who live in the north know where that is. So I'm a big Sundown supporter. So let me just be clear now. But yeah, I grew up with two hardworking parents who owned businesses. They owned some supermarkets in the then Gopolang Ngale-Lekgetha. So like you, Sbu, I remember having to, go to school. I went to schools in Pretoria, which was in the then, Transvaal. And I remember having to go to school and people burning tires on the road because, of obviously the era that people were living in and the issues then. So, I grew up knowing that I have to work hard. That was just that. My parents were very clear, put the work in and you'll get the results. And to a point where even my father, who has an accounting background, but was, I don't forget this ever in everything that I do. He said to us, everything I have, I'm leaving it to the church or to an orphanage. You and your sister must work and get your own stuff. So from then on, I knew, okay, I'm on my own, I have to make this thing work. Go to school, get it right, and continue to get it right. So yeah, that's my background.
Okay, I think very similar stories as you guys speak. I'm hearing myself in you. Grew up in a township called Tsakane, which is in the East Rand. We later then moved to Benoni, which is also in the East Rand, and so I'm an East Rand baby through and through. My mom and dad both retired now. My mom was a teacher. Taught at a high school called Tolulwazi in Tsakane. And my dad, I want to say he was a mix of entrepreneur and corporate guy. So I think he's the first person I had in my life who I could really talk to about life in corporate, because he started off kind of lecturing at Wits and then went off and had his own business, and then ultimately worked in the IDC where he retired. But that's kind of the mix. When I think of the rest of my family, so aunties, uncles, extended families, very similar: teachers, nurses, people working in factories, but truly, really, humble, hard-working people is the way I would describe it.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. Thanks for sharing a little bit about how you grew up. I'm curious, when you think about somebody could be watching this right now and saying, look at all these successful Black people. I mean, they've got these executive jobs and these big titles. Why do we need to have a conversation about Black people in corporate? What is different about your experience? You went to the same kinds of schools that other races or ethnicities have gone to. So what's the deal, guys? Like, why is this an important conversation? I'm going to start with Motlatsi because I see you smiling there. So I'm curious, how would you answer that question? Like, why is this an important conversation? What is the distinction about being Black in a corporate?
I think we mustn't downplay our cultural backgrounds and where we come from, because it influences how we interact with corporate from day one. And I think we, coming from university into corporate with no mentor or coaches of what to expect, it was difficult. And what makes it difficult is because, firstly, a simple thing as I'm working with adults who are at the same level as me. They are, and Black adults and other races who are adults who are older than me, and having to navigate that to a point where I can find my own voice, because otherwise, the reason why I started losing my voice is because I used to see people as adults and not seeing them from a point of we are equals and we're working together. So that in itself has got an impact. So how you help people think about it and how they navigate it is quite important, because it can derail you. The second point, perhaps, is that confidence plays a big role. And I think university doesn't give you the confidence, that it doesn't prepare you for that type of confidence you would need in order for you to interact in the workplace. Because, for me, as an example, my background played a big role until I could let it go and say, I shouldn't carry this burden of where I come from into the workplace. No one knows me here. And I need to, start crafting my own story in my own space and drop that outside. That realization in itself has helped me to start to run a little bit faster, and to start believing that I'm the same as a person who's gone to St. Stephen's, because I've proven it at university, when at the University of Pretoria, coming from the township, that I'm similar to everyone. We're reading from the same book. We're doing the same accounting formula. There's no difference in the formula that you're doing. So once you realize that, it starts helping me to do all of this. But the difference, lastly, is that all of this, I had to figure it out internally. So others have got opportunities because we've got a mentor or a coach when you start, or you've got somebody you can refer to from home. But some of us early in our careers, you have to dig deep and find that inspiration and that thing that helps you actually to figure these things around. So that's why this conversation is quite important for me.
Gopolang, I saw you nodding your head. What are your thoughts in terms of that question that's maybe different from what Motlatsi has just outlined?
Yeah, I think for me, it was almost similar in the sense that, you start off in your career, you think, I've got the education now, so can I get the job, and you realize it's not so easy, because when I started, everybody was like, but where's the experience? So I was like, I didn't do any internships. I didn't have an opportunity to shadow anybody at work. That was never something that I was exposed to, or if it was there, I didn't know about it. So, for me, it also taught me that, or reminded me that hard work alone is not enough. And that's something that was a bit shocking to me with my background, because I just thought, if you show up, if you do the right things, if you do what you're supposed to do, the work will speak for itself. But as I grow up, and as I'm growing up in my career, I realized it's not enough. There's so many things you have to navigate. And that's why I do think this conversation is very important, because there are many things that people don't tell you when you're starting out. And I had, parents who were entrepreneurs, so they really never worked in a corporate. And, you would go to your dad, I'd go to my dad or my mom, and they'd be like, well, just work hard, just do what you have to do. And you're like, it's not enough, So yeah, that's why I was like nodding furiously there, because I can relate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll tell you, when my first job out of undergrad, I was, struggling. And I remember complaining to my grandmother, and she's like, well, baby, just keep God first. I was like, well, you know, I can appreciate that advice, Grandma, but I need something a little bit more tactical. You know, my manager and I are not really seeing eye to eye, but she gave me what she had to offer, you know? So I totally hear you, you know, on that point. You know, so I guess, you know, my next thought or kind of question is, if we take it down a level, you know, what do you think are some of the challenges that Black women face in corporate? I'm going to start with you, Manai, and then I'm going to go to Gopolang and get her thoughts.
Sure, Carice. Yeah. I guess it was only Gopolang and I who could answer this. I think,
Yo, Sbu, we don't want to hear your opinion on this.
yeah. I think one challenge that I can personally really identify with is being a Black female and being in certain spaces. It feels like there's a weight that you carry. Like your experience is all encompassing of other Black females. So I almost feel like, you know, I can't mess up, I can't make a mistake, I can't be too vulnerable, I can't be all of that. And I think, I mean, I suppose we could extend this to being a Black male as well, but it's just a kind of a heavy weight, a heavy thing that you do carry. And I think sometimes limits our ability to take risks, be a bit, you know, be bolder in certain things. So that's one challenge. And the other challenge I can speak of in my engineering experience, so being in a very male-dominated environment, I found that men sometimes just didn't know how to place me, first as a woman, but also as a Black woman. And so just there are sometimes things of, you know, not sure if you are able to then lead a team of other men. And so people, I think, struggle to see, where do you fit in? How do we interact with you? How do we coach you? How do we guide you? So those are the things that come, you know, top of mind on my end.
Yeah, I can relate to the being one of the only females in the room, because my background is predominantly in IT, so working in technology companies locally and globally. And I realized I was always one of the very few Black women in the room. And like it's like they don't really know what to do with you, what to say to you, how to like engage you. And then when you start really taking charge and trying to take your rightful place, then there are those words that get thrown around like, oh, you're overly confident, or you're a bit aggressive, or, you know, nonsense like that, really. And for me, it was just a matter of staying, you know, strong in my path and claiming my rightful place, and also not letting any of those labels, you know, really dictate how you move forward. So yeah, that's been my experience in this corporate jungle.
I know for me as an African American woman, you know, you were always trying to stay away from the stereotype of being the angry Black woman. So that's, I know for me, something I fought hard against for probably decades, until I had an Afrikaans coworker tell me one time, she's like, well, Carice, you're Black and you're a woman, and sometimes you get angry. And I was like, you know, you're right. Like, you know, when you kind of like separate the words, you're like, wait a minute, she is so right. I promise you, ever since then, I'm like, I mean, I don't try to act crazy at work, but I do, you know, feel like I don't have to be so worried about falling into this stereotype that I cease to be a human being who has emotions. You know, so I think that's something, you know, for me to keep in mind, you know, is that I am still human, right? You know, when I'll direct this to you, Sbu. You know, when you think about, what do you see some of the challenges that Black people have just in general, not even necessarily gender specific, as Manai and Gopolang have mentioned, but what do you see us kind of challenged with, you know, when we walk into these spaces?
Well, I mean, before you even talk about walking into the spaces, I think let's look at what the space is, right? It's historically a space that's you've been excluded from the space historically, you know, going back however long. And with gradual integration and kind of sometimes begrudging integration, it's sometimes still not a space where you can necessarily feel like you own the space. Sometimes you can feel like you're being tolerated in the space for whatever reasons. And so you walk into that environment, and very, very key is that you walk in with one, like, cultural socialization into a space that doesn't necessarily understand or doesn't gel with how you've been socialized. So the whole thing we were saying earlier about how, you know, you look at grown, whether they're black or white, as, you know, malume or mama or whatever, you've been taught for very long not to look at people in the eye, not to voice out your opinions, not to, you know, cause a ruckus, not to rock the boat. You should be grateful to be in this space. You got to protect your job, you know? So I think that socialization is very, very difficult for us, but also the ability to relate to some of the foundations or the fundamentals of the spaces that we enter. So do you play the golf, you know, on the weekends? Do you, well, in the organization that I'm in, it's not even about golf. It's, do you run? Do you cycle? You know, can you hold those conversations? The cultural references, those are things that I think we find often very, very difficult. And what it does, it then perpetuates this feeling of inadequacy, perhaps a bit of insecurity, perhaps, you know, being unsure, and then it becomes a spiral. And so to get your mindset, you speak a lot about mindset in the book, which is really good, that you need to get into a mindset where A, you feel like you belong in the space, but B, you feel like, you know, I may not single-handedly be able to change the space, but I can definitely carve out a niche for myself in this space. And so I think that's something you definitely need to deal with.
One thing I'll add before we kind of transition is, I mean, I would think also to walk into a space where you often don't see people who look like you in leadership positions, there's also something psychological about that, because then you're looking at yourself like, well, am I going to be the one? All these people have come behind me and they may not have been able to get to that level. Am I going to be the one that can break through and actually be successful? So it's also, because I often think, like, what if the tables were turned? You know, what if, you know, your young white colleague walked into a business that was all black? There's something psychological about that I think we also, you know, it's also a struggle, you know? So I just wanted us to acknowledge that. So a couple things, I'm going to go back to what Gopolang said a second ago when you were talking about hard work is not enough. I mean, and that's why I named my book Intelligence Isn't Enough, because, you know, it's one of the things I feel like globally, Black people, we're being told, like, get all these degrees, get as many letters as you can behind your name, and everything will, you know, the world will open up for you. And it's just not the truth, right? I think the degrees and the qualifications and the certifications help us get our foot in the door, but they don't necessarily guarantee us success or advancement. And so I wanted to kind of transition to talk about this concept of shared responsibility, which I talk about in the book, right? So I feel like organizations have a role, but we also have a role. So I really want to spend the balance of our conversation talking about what is it that we can do in light of everything that we're challenged with, in light of everything that, you know, might not necessarily be working in our favor. What is it that we can do? Kind of going back to Sbu's point around mindset. So the framework of my book is know yourself, know other people, know your environment, integrate those three to build a personal brand and a communication style that allows you to have maximum impact. So I'd love to kind of talk about those 5 areas kind of in the balance of the time, right? So the first one is the mindset issue, which Sbu started alluding to, you know, just now. I'd love, you know, Motlatsi, because I want us to also talk about ourselves, right? And what some of our own mindset shifts were. I mean, when you think about coming into corporate, you know, I think you said you went to UP, you went to Tux, right? So it's like you get out of Tux, you're smart, you've got the grades. What was one of the biggest mindset shifts you had to have about yourself in order to be successful at Standard Bank?
So one of them was just to drop this fact that I'm from UP and I'm smart, because I met people who are really smart, right? But it just humbles you. And I think there's also another notion where you start finding like people who look like you actually who are doing great. And I think we mustn't downplay that, because for the first time, you get into a space where there's Black people who can look up to and who are really not window dressing, who who are really, really working hard. So it's also just to change, help me to move from, this idea of you are not enough, and then you see others and you start to acknowledge that you're actually enough. I think over the years in the growth, I've also realized that we also have to play our role when we've got the seat on the table. Because I think once we've got the seat on the table is what do you do with that power to make sure that you effect change? Because chances are you've got a bigger voice than people below you that you can start using that voice. And the third thing is that when you see injustices, when you, for example, you take over, you run different business units. I'll make an example. I go to the front line and I run the sales function. And when we do the pay, we're doing pay allocation, you start to see that females are paid lower than males. And then you start to see the difference between whites and blacks. As a person who's got the power, I must now deal with that situation and not postpone it for someone else. So I have to deal it and take the short-term pains and deal with the fallout that comes through. But at least you're using your seat on the table to make a change. And that's how I've actually tried to make sure that I deal with this issue of mindset change, to influence the people like me who are black or executives who are on the table, to say you will not leave the table until you utilize your power for what it's meant to do, for the good that it's supposed to do. So that's how I approach things.
Awesome. Gopolang, I saw you nodding your head over there as Motlatsi was talking. What are your thoughts on knowing yourself and managing your mindset to be successful?
Yeah, for me, it was definitely, yes, you come into the business or the company with your education, your experience, all of that. But one big thing that I think we need to be clear and share is that you need to be accountable, So what I've realized is as an individual, you need to be accountable for your own career and your own success. So everything can't be everybody else's fault. And yes, we know there are a lot of injustices and inequalities, but what do you own? What can you control? And what are you doing about that? That's something that I learned for myself, because all the companies I've worked for are fantastic companies to work for. They've got the greatest policies and all of those things. They've all won top employer and so forth. But those policies mean nothing if I, as Gopolang, the individual, do not take advantage of them, do not take the time to read them, to learn how that impacts me and what that means for me in my career, and then use them appropriately. So that's something that definitely I learned as, through my career, that I can have everything come with it, but I need to take accountability and also be consistent in ensuring that my brand is delivered across all these organizations with the people that I touch is consistent all throughout. And that's one thing I've been very clear on, that from my first job to now, I believe that the same three words will probably be, said if somebody was to describe me.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I actually am going to skip to that concept, because I know that's something that a lot of young people I've talked to really wrestle with, is this concept of personal branding. I've heard a lot of people say, well, look, either I'm 100% real or I'm 100% fake. Like there's no in between. And I feel like when we give ourselves these kind of really binary options, who wants to say they're going to be fake? Like nobody wants to say that. So we don't really give ourselves, more of a nuanced view in terms of how we could show up at work. So let's even define what personal brand is. And it's kind of what Gopolang was just saying. It's what are the words and the emotions that you want to come to mind when somebody says Sbu. That's really what your brand is, right? And so then you need to be showing up in a way, you need to be delivering, you need to be communicating, you need to be dressing, your social media presence. All these things need to align with those words that you want to evoke for yourself when someone says your name. And I saw somebody the other day say it's not just what you do, but it's also everything you don't do, everything you don't say. Those things also shape your brand. So when you hear somebody say something about being 100% real and 100% fake, for me, I talk about it in my book as being a continuum of authenticity. It's not one thing or the other, it's a spectrum. And you need to look at your audience, your message, the context to figure out where you play on that spectrum. But hopefully you're some version of yourself. Like if your family came to work, hopefully they would recognize you. They might be like, okay, she's a little toned down, but I still see Gopolang in there somewhere, you know? And if the people from work came to hang out with you and your family and your closest friends, they'd be like, okay, she's a little bit louder than she normally is at work. She's cracking a few more jokes, but I still recognize her. I'm curious, what do you all think about what would you tell somebody who's worried about, I either have to be 100% fake or 100% real?
I'm going to go.
Yeah, go ahead, Manai.
Just because, we've had some chats with this with some friends, which is really right. Your personal brand, whether you want to acknowledge if you have one or not, you have it, right? So that's the first thing. And the second thing around it, when we talk about authenticity, you know, keeping it 100, I don't want to be fake, I want to be real. I think you can be all those things, right? But you have to think about how you present yourself and how you want to be perceived. So in being 100 and in saying, this is my view on the world, there's a way you can say that view. You know, there's a way you can present yourself and what you stand for and what you believe. Authentically so, but being very conscious of your environment and how you present yourself. So I think that it's not necessary to remove yourself or be less authentic, but I think you really must be tactful or maybe intentional. It's a word you use a lot in your book, Carice, which I love, intention. Being more intentional about how we present ourselves in and out of the workplace.
Absolutely. And kind of on this whole point of personal branding, I feel like is another element that I've seen a lot of Black people struggle with is this idea of talking about ourselves and our accomplishments. It is quite counterintuitive to us globally from what I've seen. Black people in America struggle, South Africa, Ghana, Nigeria. It seems to be something across the board. But you all have obviously found some way to do that because you're successful in these big corporates. Sbu, how have you found a way to talk about yourself and your accomplishments so that people know what you're doing, even though you might not necessarily have been comfortable with that when you first started?
Yeah, I think the very first instance I had of discomfort around this was being interviewed for the firm. And you're kind of given, I won't call it a playbook, but a rundown of in the interview. If you keep saying we and our when you talk about achievements, then you're probably not going to get this thing. You need to talk about what you did, what's the change that you effected, etc. And I found that very, very difficult. One tactic that I always tell people who struggle with that is, you know, you can let your personality, you can let your accomplishments, you can let your work. If you're afraid to speak for yourself, it's a lot easier to do it if your actions and your output speaks for itself, or if you need to speak to it, you're on very solid ground because you've got things to show for it. So, you know, we were talking earlier about how, you know, your intelligence is not enough and your hard work is not enough. If you step into that space, there's one thing that you can't do as a Black person, and that's to say, well, this is how it should be, right? We should all be evaluated equally, and we should 100% agree. But until we've morphed corporate South Africa or other spaces to reflect that, best believe you actually do need to work a little bit harder. You do need to show a little bit more, right? And when you've got those things behind you, it does become a little bit easier to speak to it. But I think also it's something that you've got to practice. It becomes like any muscle. You know, if you don't practice it, or any skill, you've got to practice it. And there's a balance, right? Because there is a way to speak about yourself in ways that can alienate people, can turn people off of you, can make you seem, you know, arrogant, can make you come across as that guy. But there are also ways in which you can speak to yourself that speaks power into who you are, into your character, into what your capabilities are. And that's what people gravitate to. We set up forums, I won't call them forums, but people you can talk to, whether they're Black, whether they're white, whatever, but people you trust, that you can literally practice this with. And I don't mean like a rigid conversation, okay, I'm interviewing you, interviewing me, but where you guys are able to support one another, to in the kids' parlance, gas each other up, but you can help each other be more comfortable with what you're capable of and what you can achieve.
Gotcha. Thank you for sharing that. Motlatsi, I saw you nodding your head on this point. Did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think what was resonating with me, which maybe I wanted to expand on, is the fact that sometimes there's some truths that we must accept. And if we can accept those truths as well, might make life a little bit easier. And one of them is that, unfortunately, in this system, we'll probably have to work twice as hard for legitimacy purposes and for you to be noticed and somebody to want to hear what you have to say. It's not an ideal situation, but I find that it gives you credibility for you to be able to start effecting change. Because if you don't, because we don't have that sort of a big muscle or big numbers that, or historical sort of things that you can fall on, we don't have in the corporate. So sometimes I think that truth you may have to accept as quickly as possible, and then it will make life easier. Why I'm saying this is because you also want to make sure that in how your brand and a personal story comes through is not that one of people see you as a problem maker or you're rebellious or angry, but in there you want to make sure that when I start saying things and I say them with authority, people can start listening because I've sort of carved the way. But I want to make sure that the next generation that comes don't have to work 3 times harder than the others. It should be a natural thing that when I work hard, I produce results. It's not because of my color of my skin, or I don't have to have 10 degrees for me to prove myself. That I'm worth it. So I think that's quite important for me in how we sort of craft ourselves in that manner. And lastly, there's the issue you spoke about authenticity. I think, for me, in general, I used to think that it would be so tiring to be 2 people, one at work and one at home. I'm not sure who can keep up with that. And secondly is that I find that people actually connect emotionally with people who are real, because the people can tell for a mile that you are putting up a show. So when you are real, people know how to interact with you and how to, have conversations with you because they understand you completely. And I find that actually is the way in how you win people's hearts, even when people are quite difficult, because people normally connect with people on an emotional level either way. And authentic people are the people that actually tend to, people that tend to be drawn towards.
Yeah, I 1,000% agree with you. And I think some of these things that we've, used to be successful, things like, I won't even call some of these things out, but the things that we have thought make us successful, I think sometimes have made us appear inauthentic. And it blocks us from having relationships with people because we seem fake, and people don't usually want to connect with people who aren't real, I think is a really good point. And I think that also kind of takes me back to even just the second part of my book, which is about other people, connecting with other people, getting along with people who are different than us. I would love to hear, I see Manai, I see you shaking your head, some thoughts about what are some things you have learned about working with other people that, you didn't know when you first started working. What kind of maybe some mindset shifts you had once you started working in the corporate space about getting along and collaborating with others?
Yeah, I think, Carice, on working with other people, you don't have a choice about it. You're going to get thrown into teams. You'll get a manager that you might like or not like. And so it's just a skill that it's something you need to get comfortable with. So what I do like to do personally is if I find myself in spaces, whether it be a conference or whatever, I try to identify the person who looks most different to me and just go have a conversation with them, right? So that's just a challenge from, since I started working, I'll go for that old white man and just say hi, and see what could come out of that. And some fantastic relationships have come through that. But just on working with other people, I think it's acknowledging that we do have differences, but also noticing how similar we are. And I think sometimes we focus so much on the differences that we don't acknowledge that we're all people. We all have fears, ambitions. There's things that we all aspire towards. And when we can connect on a human level, I've seen that transform working relationships in an incredible way. So
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
I think for me, you know, we're going to get ready to take some questions from the audience. But one of the things I think for me was realizing that, you know, everybody tells you to be excellent. Go be excellent, you know, but nobody ever says you're going to be excellent through, with, and for other people. You're not going to be excellent and have all this impact by yourself. That's number one. And number two, you know, I needed to kind of release my ego and realize I don't bring everything to the table. Right. I bring some things, but other people bring things that I don't have, and those things matter just as much. And so once you can kind of look at other people's differences as assets and not as a liability, I think that also helps you connect with people. And also, I'll say this last point, and then I'll turn it to Jennifer for some audience questions, is learning how to deal with some of these courageous conversations, as I like to call them. Like sometimes not just trying to glaze over things, that tension or that little side eye, that passive aggressiveness, but just like calling a thing and saying like, hey, you know, Sbu, I'm noticing some tension between the two of us. Is it something I've said or done? You know, as you know, because I didn't like to address the conflict because I didn't know how. So I just tried to totally, you know, ignore it, and it only made the relationship worse. And so those are some of the things I've learned too from working with other people. Jennifer, I'll turn it to you to share some of the questions from the comments that you've been seeing.
Cool. Yeah, we have a whole bunch of people saying they've really enjoyed the conversation. It's inspiring. It's they've, you know, people are just loving it. So thanks very much. I think it's been a really interesting conversation so far, and I think I think a lot of people are getting a lot out of it. So that's fantastic. A lot of people have made comments more than questions, which is, you know, what we like to do. So I will bring them up, even if they're comments, and perhaps you could just like talk around them, that kind of thing. The first one I'd like to look at is from Nico, who says, everyone's upbringing is so humbling and inspiring. And I just want to add another little note to that from Nontobeko, who don't shoot the messenger for this comment, but she says, Sbu uchi zwena. So yeah. But I think to go back to the humbling and inspiring upbringing, perhaps you could speak a little bit more about how your upbringing sort of made you what you are.
That's a good one.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead, Motlatsi.
I just want to share an experience I've just gone through, and I think the question speaks to that experience. I've just completed a process around personal visioning. And that personal visioning process actually taps into your story and your upbringing so that you can start identifying and acknowledging the elements that makes you who you are from when you are little to where you are, the things that you've done and how they shape you, the difficulties that you've gone through, how they shape you. And I thought that was quite powerful because you can't, in actual fact, you can't ignore the power of where you come from. If maybe I jump into what Sbu was explaining as an example, to use your story, Sbu, is that in that instance of violence, you know, there's a resilience that gets built in you that somehow, maybe you might not identify it, but you start identifying it today, that actually, you know, me having to go through that process and completing my schooling and not be sucked into the violence of the time has something around how I build my resourcefulness and, you know, all of that. And I think our stories, for me personally, I think it's got inspiration in itself, that I don't see it as a space where I could say, yeah, you know, I grew up very poor. But in that, there was a lesson, I guess, for me, that was meant for me to learn in how I would drive my life today. So that's quite important, I think, element of where we come from.
Yeah, and can I just jump in here just real quick? I want to encourage everybody on this, whoever is listening to this call or listening to a replay, go back and look at your story. Look at the moments, the people, the situations that have shaped you for good or for bad into who you are. There's so much power in our stories, right? And that's where a lot of our perspective comes from. And I say in my book that your story is the greatest, source of your pain, your purpose, and your power. So go back and think about those things, because those are the things that also impact how we show up at work. I mean, I give an example in my book about a girl that I was working with at McKinsey, or a woman I was working with at McKinsey, and she was struggling to ask for help. And once we kind of unpacked her story, a lot of it came from that. She grew up in a single parent household. Her father died, and her mother was busy working and trying to provide for her and her siblings. So she didn't have a lot of agency or a lot of space to ask for help. And she saw herself as, being a burden when she was asking for help. So when she got into the corporate space, she couldn't ask for help. And that was a huge part of being successful. So that's why I think it's so important for us to look back on all the, parts of our story and see how those elements are impacting us now, either inspiring us or maybe making us somewhat negative. So I encourage everyone to spend some time reflecting and thinking about your personal story. Gopolang, I see you nodding your head. Did you want to add anything on that?
No, I completely agree with what you're saying. I think it's so important to look back at the things that have shaped you, because those instances or those memories or lessons sometimes come in very handy when you move through your career, and they do definitely shape your perception about people, life, and things. So it's important to always just go back and revisit that to see how you can leverage off those learnings, or even try and avoid the same mistakes again.
Yeah. Or even for me, it was about identifying some themes. I realized a lot of my early career decisions, once I looked back, it was all about money. I didn't realize that was kind of it was all about who's going to pay me enough money. I was like, I'm going to the highest bidder. I'm on the auction block. I'm like, who's going to pay me the most money so I don't have to go back home and live with my parents? As much as I love you, mother and father, I was like, I've been away at college for 4 years. I cannot go back home and have a curfew. So who's paying me the most money? And I realized, I'm like, Carice, I can't continue that can't continue to be my only driver in terms of my decision. So it also helps you start to identify some themes, like Gopolang is saying, some things. Okay, it's like, that's what I did the first 6 or 7 years of my career. I want to do something different, or I want to consider other factors, not just the financial ones. Jennifer, did you have another comment or question for us that you wanted to share?
We do. I think they're coming in thick and fast as well. I have one here from Machema, who says, finding your voice in corporate is so important yet difficult. My upbringing as a Black woman was filled with, you need to respect elders. In corporate, these elders are my equals, but still expect the respect, which is usually silence. So I'm not sure who would like to talk about that one.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in there, Carice, because I mean, I've been in roles where I've had people older than me report into me, in a few roles actually. And you're right, we're all raised to respect your elders, but in a work environment, I think it's very important to separate personal feelings to what the job at hand, without obviously putting people down and being disrespectful. Your values and principles will always be innate in you, and you will obviously act according to. So although you have older people reporting to you or working with you, there's still ways to respectfully voice your opinion. But silence is definitely not an option. You have to always make your voice heard.
Yeah. And even me, I mean, obviously I grew up in the States, but I grew up in a family that was very much like, you do what the older people tell you to do. I was very much, and I went to Catholic school for 12 years too. So I was getting the authority figure at home, and I was getting it at school. And I had to realize, like, I can't always just do exactly what this person that is in a higher position just tells me to do. Like, it's okay for me to ask questions and maybe to push back and challenge, because at the end of the day, it's my time, it's my reputation, it's my work that could be jeopardized if I don't push back a little bit. And although I've made some progress, I realized, at one point, much later in life than probably I should have, is that I was like, I still got some work to do on this space. Because sometimes it's about progress and not perfection. So sometimes we have to remember, like, okay, I'm better than I was yesterday, but I still, have some room to grow in certain areas, including this one.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jennifer,
If
you were
I
going to
may,
say something. Oh, sorry, go Motlatsi.
So one of the things I think maybe we must also consider is also that experience silences voices as well. Where people have more experience, you find that those with less experience, they are being silenced. I find that as well. Not that you are being silenced, but I think the environment, there's a perception that, can't say anything because you don't know anything. Sometimes you might also have to think about the show and tell, that you go do something on the side that people think that was not worth listening to, and then you bring it into the room because you find that that becomes impactful, and people now all of a sudden wants to listen to this voice which everybody has been ignoring, either because of you're young or you don't have experience. But I think also this show and tell, and you just go do stuff and come back, starts to make people to think different about you and start listening to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Just before we get Jennifer to share another question, I want to pose one more question to the panel. So you all have worked in different corporates. I know, except Motlatsi, he's kind of, he's a long termer. He's like an OG at Standard Bank. Been there, 14 years, I think, Motlatsi. But how did you all, when you started working in these different corporates, or even, for you, Motlatsi, being at Standard Bank, how did you figure that place out? Because that's something I talk about in my book too, is just understanding the culture of the environment that you're working in, and then somehow finding a way to show up in an authentic manner in that works for that environment. So what were the things that you all looked for, listened for, thought, questions you asked to say, like, how does this place work so that I can figure out how I need to show up? I'm going to start with you, Manai. What was what did you do to kind of figure out the places that you've worked?
Yeah, so Carice, I think spending time with people and being intentional about which people you want to spend time with is something I definitely did. So within an organization, I try to target the ones who have been around for quite some time. I also try to target people in leadership positions, right? Because I want to understand how they navigated the system to get, well, not the system, that sounds terrible. I want to understand how they navigated their careers to get to where they are. So I think definitely chatting to people who have been around the organization, who have that kind of that heritage knowledge, as well as people I aspire to within the leadership space. And then also our peers, so younger people. So I'm still a millennial. I don't know if the rest of you are on the cusp of millennial. I'm still there. So you don't have to answer.
We left that a long time ago, Manai.
Yeah.
We're not going to talk about ages and numbers or anything, no. But yeah, we left that a long time ago.
Yeah, but really, Carice, chatting also to people who are also new in the organization. So new people who've been there for some time, and people in the leadership positions as well. Those are people and being intentional again about chatting to people outside of your own function. So if you work in marketing, don't think that your only kind of like core group are people within marketing. Chat to the guys in IT, talk to someone in finance, talk to the people in the strategy team. So chat to everyone in the business, not just people that work in your function or spaces that you're comfortable with.
Yeah, I think we have to be open too, that we don't know everything. And that even if you go from one consulting firm to another consulting firm, you can't assume that, I can behave the same way in both. You really need to understand, how does this particular firm work? How does this particular organization work? Because, I may have worked in telecom somewhere else, but I need to figure out how this place works. I think there's also a level of humility and openness that we need to be, and more listening than talking when we first, get into an organization, for sure. Because they've got a specific way of doing things, and we are not going to change that, day one.
Yeah, I think what you just said now about listening, that's one thing I do. I want to get invited to every meeting when I join an organization, because that's how you're going to really understand what the business is about, what the challenges are. And again, to what Manai said, cross functions, right? Across functions. So that's one thing I always do. I say, please invite me to every single meeting. Even if I've got nothing to add, I'll just sit there and listen, because that's how I'm going to learn.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jennifer,
did you have another comment for us?
Yes, I was first one to say, who would have thought we would hear such wisdom from a millennial? But I guess that's why we're here.
The poor millennials, y'all get a hard time. I got love for y'all, Manai. I got love for y'all.
So Nico asks, she would like to pose this question across the panel. Is it important to have a mentor, especially when you have a goal to grow within the corporate space, or can you live without one?
Oh, can I jump in there? I think I would put it as absolutely key to have a mentor, but I don't want us to necessarily look at the word mentor as this rigid type of relationship, interview, you sit across that table, I sit across this table. Some of the best mentorship relationships that I've been able to cultivate and grow have been absolutely informal. They've come from, working with someone who you then can identify is very strong in certain areas that you may know that you lack in. And you form a friendship or a relationship with that person, and they become a person that you bounce ideas off. But it's to this point that we're talking about now, about how we don't know everything, right? And so if you feel you need to navigate a space, but you're going to try and do it alone when there are people who've been there longer than you, who've been in more diverse roles in the organization than you have, why would you not want to tap into knowledge and understanding that's gone before you? We've all been in difficult situations and difficult circumstances and really needed to question, how do I deal with this? How do I approach this conversation? I've got this coworker, I've got my boss who I'm struggling with. And if you've got someone, whether they're, on the same level, whether they're senior to you, whatever, who you can really go to and say, how would you do this? Question my thinking, help me think through this. This is what I think I would do. But I don't know if I'm blinkered in my thoughts, if I'm fueled by my emotion and I'm not seeing that maybe I'm heading down a path that's not the one. Help me through this. And I think it's important when you talk about a mentor to make sure that it's not just, as you guys were saying, someone in your function. People who use different parts of their brain on a daily basis compared to you will see problems very differently. We'll see pathways to solutions that you are very blind to or have a blind spot to. And so I would say, the old adage of, going quickly and going far, I think we all know it. You need people. Invest in your relationships, and particularly in a corporate environment. Where we are, it's not necessarily about, your technical proficiency. I think we all pride ourselves, or all of our organizations will pride themselves on, we hire the best. Now it's about how do I leverage the people that I work with or the relationships that I have with them so that I can not only grow by myself, but we can grow together.
Absolutely. Can I say something controversial though too? Because it wouldn't be a panel discussion without it. I definitely think we need mentors, but I also think we need sponsors. And for those of you that are maybe on the call and don't know what a sponsor is, so a mentor can be somebody who's senior anywhere, right? But that sponsor needs to be somebody who's senior in your company, and not just somebody who has a title, because there's a lot of people with titles, but somebody who has influence, somebody who has some juice, who is going to, because what I realize is a lot of the really important decisions about my career, I'm not going to be in the room when those decisions are made. So those are decisions about raises, bonuses, step up opportunities, promotions. And so you need the people in that room to be advocating for you. And you need to have, for them to, want to put their necks on the line for you. And the only way they're going to do that is if they know you, if they like you, and they trust you. Yeah. And so I want us to also think about how can we get, and sponsors are earned usually, right? You don't really ask somebody, be my sponsor. So you got to show up, like Gopolang was saying earlier, be consistent, take ownership of your career, take ownership of the problem. Sbu just talked about ownership of your relationships. Make sure you're prioritizing on your calendar time to be building these relationships. Offer to do extra work for people on the side that you want to have access to and you want to build that trust with. or you want to get some visibility with. Offer your hands. You have something to give to them too. It shouldn't just be a one-way relationship. So think about, even with your mentor, what can I offer to Sbu or Motlatsi if they're my mentors? Can I send them articles of things that they're interested in? Things that might be relevant for them. Like, find ways to also give back, and so that the relationship is a two-way relationship. Now, it might not be equal, but at least it's two-way. I just wanted to throw that out there too.
Even, sorry, Carice, on your on your controversy train, is just thinking about mentors and us always feeling like they have to be 3D people, I think is very limiting, right? So I think I found many mentors in the hundreds of books that I've read, for instance. And so a mentor, don't always just think of it as it's a person that I need to see and meet physically. It really can be in the kind of content that you consume. Through the types of books you read, as an example.
Yeah. And also that you can have multiple mentors. You don't have to get everything from one person. Maybe you have one mentor that helps you think about balancing family and work. You got another mentor who's like a subject matter expert. You got somebody else who's doing some work you're interested in. Like, you can have multiple mentors for multiple purposes. So don't feel like, you need to find one person that, meets every need that you have. You can have multiple people, but you just have to make sure you set aside the time to manage those relationships. And look, these people are busy usually that you want to mentor you. So if they cancel on you 5 times, you reschedule on the 6th time. Don't be like, oh, well, Spu's too busy. He doesn't have time for me. I'm like, you force Sbu. Like, you show up outside Spu's office and you make just shy of stalking, guys. Don't want you to stalk anybody. But I do want you to be persistent, and you let Sbu know, like, I'm serious. I really want time with you, and I'm not going to be deterred by your multiple cancellations. So show that you really want to have that relationship, and you're willing to invest the time in it as well.
Yeah. Just to Manai, I think what you said was so key. I was speaking to a colleague today, and he was telling me over the weekend, asking me what you did for the long weekend, and he says he was redoing the floors in the bedrooms in his home. And he says, you could learn anything off YouTube these days. So he just watched a few YouTube videos and he did the flooring and it worked out and it was great. If you believe that much in, watching some YouTube,
I think we lost.
I'm there, but I just wanted to echo your point, is that content is vast, it's everywhere. These are not the days of, I don't know if you guys remember the World Book Encyclopedia or Childcraft, where we had to look things up and, page and page. We have access to information like this. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, some of it's curated, some of it's not. But to your point is absolutely key. Guys, just consume as much as you can of good, balanced content that's going to drive your career forward.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I think, do we have time for a couple more questions? Are you guys willing to answer a couple more?
Sure.
Sure.
Cool. I'm going to group these 3 together. I think they're related. Zanele says imposter syndrome is also at play. Siposeto adds, adding on to Zanele's comment above, have you guys had to deal with imposter syndrome in your careers? If so, how have you managed to deal with it? And then I think that kind of relates to what Nontobeko asks here. Do you ever feel guilty about being afforded opportunities versus your other Black counterparts, feeling less relatable?
Maybe I can jump into the opportunities. I have never felt guilty. I think
I love it.
I think it's very important, because sometimes I think we just carry burdens that has nothing to do with us, and they become stumbling blocks in how we progress in life, right? And because unfortunately, you won't find a space where you've got 5 people and there's 5 opportunities. There'll be 5 people, but there'll be 1 opportunity. So it's up to you as an individual in how you're going to work towards being recognized for that opportunity. And this is not, getting opportunities that people might say, yeah, but you don't deserve it. I'm not sure who deserves a better opportunity than you, because you have to take it back to yourself and say, if you wake up and you come to work and you do, the work, why would you not think that you deserve of the opportunities that are coming through if you are, you're doing everything that's there for you to do to get those? Because what will end up happening, you self-sabotage. And even when there's great things that people can see in you, you start feeling that you're not worthy of these. I think for me, you get those opportunities, but also remember as well in that journey to create opportunities for others. So when you've used a ladder to go up, don't kick it. Allow others as well to use the same ladder to come up, and not say, I've come here on my own, because obviously you may get those opportunities, but definitely you have not done the work on your own. There's other people who have shaped you. So it's important as well that you make sure that in that process where you get opportunities, you also try and create opportunities for others as well to come up.
Yeah. Can I answer? Okay, go ahead. Go.
Okay, sorry, Wanda. I was going to say that unlike my colleague here, I do sometimes feel guilty. That's the truth, and maybe that's a female thing. I don't know, but I do sometimes feel guilty, and I don't feel guilty because I'm less than or less worthier, than the next person. I just am very conscious that we don't all get to have exposure to the same opportunities. And yes, I may be intelligent and I may work hard, but probably that other person is too. But where I do agree with my colleague here on the panel is definitely that once you're in that role, what are you doing to bring others along or on the journey with you? So that's where I feel that then the responsibility then becomes very strong and heavy on me. But I think that, definitely do feel a bit guilty, because I do believe there's so many worthy people out there, but they don't all get to have the experiences that I have or the opportunities that I have, because I have the background that I have and have worked for these organizations, which by virtue of that, you get more exposed to better and bigger opportunities.
Can I just add one little? Oh, sorry, Manai, you wanted to go, and then I'll go after you, and then Jennifer, we'll go with that question.
No problem, Carice. So I wanted to speak to the question on imposter syndrome. Shout out to Zanele Masombuka. That's my friend. So lovely to know you're watching. So, hey, Zaz. On the imposter syndrome one, I think the mindset shift that comes with that is, first of all, I think a lot of people suffer from it. I suffer from it. I think a lot of leaders out there suffer with it. So knowing that, firstly, you're not the only one, I think is a comforting thing just in and of itself. And I've also seen how having it affects how you show up, right? So when I'm feeling that way, I sometimes feel like, okay, now I need to prove that I really deserve to be in the room. So I'm going to act like I know it all. I'm going to do this and that. And then you don't ask questions when you don't know, which is a terrible thing. So I think the mindset shift around imposter syndrome is a really important one, because it's okay to say, hey, sometimes I doubt myself, but I'm not going to let that now be the reason that I try to show up as someone that I'm not. So that won't stop me from asking the questions, which oftentimes many other people in the room want to ask, but don't actually ask. And that just shows also that, like, you could be in a boardroom and, you ask a question, you think it's a silly question. After the meeting, they're like, oh, thank you for asking that. I had it on my mind, which speaks to you. You'll find it's not just you. There's a lot of us in the room who might feel a certain way. So just wanted to comment on that.
Yeah. Just two things on this. I think also I was reading an article about different types of imposter syndrome. And one of the things is we have this kind of unrealistic expectations of ourselves. Sometimes, like, we feel like, oh, I'm supposed to do all this on my own. If I have to ask for help, then that means I shouldn't have the job. It's like, no, everybody's out here getting help, guys. Let me tell you, people are getting some of their spouses to do PowerPoint slides, like in these consulting firms. So everybody is getting help. So, I mean, it's also about sometimes checking what are our beliefs about success and what does success look like and how does it show up. We need to start challenging that. I think the second thing is kind of a spin on this imposter syndrome is also this idea that sometimes if we get opportunities because we have been historically disadvantaged, we feel like, oh, I don't deserve this opportunity. But look, I mean, I think about those kids whose parents, you know, the college admission scandal in America. Those kids were sitting at these really expensive schools knowing they had cheated their way, and they did not feel an ounce of guilt. So they were like, I'm here, I'm gonna take advantage of this opportunity. And I would tell you all to do exactly the same. However you get into a space, don't worry about it, but just feel like I'm going to take full advantage. I'm going to own my work. I'm going to show up. I'm going to deliver. I'm going to be consistent, like Gopolang was saying, and don't worry about how you got it. That is not your business. Just take advantage of it. That's my advice to you. Jennifer, last question for the panelists before we close out.
Well, sadly, it's not the last question. There are a lot of questions coming in. So perhaps when this is finished, if you are on Facebook or YouTube, perhaps the panelists could go and have a look and see what people have been saying and maybe reply to a couple of comments if you have the time, but I'm sure you're very busy. But I mean, I think there's some really cool comments and questions there. But the one I wanted to end off with, because I think it's quite a nice one to finish with, is from Asanda, who says, what do you think the changes will be for the next generation? What does the future look like for Black professionals in the workplace? I'm not sure who would like to tackle that.
I'll
Carice, because you've written the book.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? I think, because this is one of the questions I had for you all that I didn't get around to asking, but what do I think Black professionals are doing well? I mean, I think we're persevering, right? Through all of the challenges, through all of the struggles, through all of the disadvantage, right? We're going to the best schools in the country, on the continent, in the world. We're getting master's degrees. We're working hard. We're showing up. We're applying to these really prestigious companies. So I think if we can get in with a slightly different mindset, maybe a bit of an evolved mindset, right? That we need other people, that we've got to own our relationships, own our brands, own our work. I think the sky is the limit. I really, really do. I don't think, you know, anyone can hold us back. If no one can hold us back up to this point, no one can hold us back in the future too, right? So I think it's a matter of us doing the right things, being strategic, you know, not just doing the work and hoping that we'll get tapped on the shoulder as knighted as the chosen one, but like building the right relationships with sponsors and mentors, investing our time in the right places, taking a step back to see, am I developing at the right pace with the right skills at the right time? If we can just be, I think, a bit more strategic and realize that in spite of everything that might be against us, we have so much going for us and so much that's within our power to define our destiny. That's what I really believe. So I believe the sky is the limit. And that's part of the reason I even wrote this book. I want to see more Black people in senior positions in South Africa, especially because I've been here for almost 10 years. Like, I want to see more Black CEOs, more Black CFOs, C-suite. And it's so possible. We have the intellectual horsepower. I think if we can just shape up on some of our softer skills, that's really going to just take us to the next level. Manai, I think you wanted to go next.
I think with everything you've said, I might just keep quiet now. But I wanted to say, Carice, I mean, I think the future starts with conversations like this. It starts with a Carice writing a book that now, you know, we can take these lessons and transfer them to so many people. It starts with you gifting that to 10 graduates that you know, purchase the book for 10 grads, give it to them, buy it for your cousins. But really having the conversations, tapping into the networks that we have. That's what I see.
Yeah.
Anyone else like to add?
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I'm really encouraged by what we're seeing, particularly around you know, fee protests and things like that. You know, people think fee protests are new. We had fee protests when I was in varsity. Granted, there were probably about 20 people there. We did it during the lunch break. It wasn't very visible, and we all went back to lectures after that. But seeing this generation and the kind of the generation over the last few years be more deliberate and intentional in what they feel that they deserve in the spaces they want to occupy, this one specifically being around education, makes me really, really hopeful that spaces like corporate South Africa, like, you know, whatever other spaces where traditionally and historically Black people have not been there, I feel like we're gaining momentum, we're gaining courage, we're gaining, you know, that knowledge and that ability of actually like I mean, if I got to work for it, the kids are not asking for free degrees. They're saying we want to study, right? We want to work and earn this. And so we're also going to get to a point where they're like, actually in these corporate spaces, we want to work and we want to infiltrate and permeate through all of them and show you what we can do. So I'm very, very encouraged by what we're seeing. It's painful now for the country, but I think it will only augur well for the future.
Would anyone else have any thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely want to add on that. I think I'd like to add to that, just to say I agree. I think, the future looks very bright for Black professionals in the workplace, because I know so many of them who are now very confident to speak up. I think that's been something that has always been a bit missing, but now I see more confidence in, the young people that I have in my organization and I engage with and mentor. They are very, very confident in speaking up and asking the questions and challenging. And I think that's something that gives me hope and tells me that we're going in the right direction.
And Motlatsi, maybe some thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think also what I'm seeing as well is that the boardrooms and the excos are starting to be Black and young, and they're starting to be female. So that, for me, I think also gives me hope that we are on the right path. I mean, even though I could be having worked for one entity, I deal with lots of entities outside where you go to boardrooms to discuss deals, and you can see the shape of these boardrooms and excos are starting to change. But obviously it can't change on its own as well. We have to keep on doing what we're supposed to do ourselves, but also encourage the others who are coming as well to do, to keep the baton. But also to make sure that at least in every corner we have, we must just own that space, right? We must just make sure that, we own our careers, we own where we want to go, and we push through it, because that's the only way, because others will make way, and then you come through. When you're at the top, make way again for the rest. And that's how I think would be able to push and solve this problem. So wherever you are, let's just brighten the corner where you are, and you'll see what that impact is going to be in the next generation.
Thank you very much. Carice, do you have some final remarks?
No, I just took a few notes over here as people were talking, and I just wanted to point out just some things that stuck out to me. I think one of the things Sbu said was how it should versus how it is, right? I think that's important to deal with what it is. And then once, we're more in a position of power to shape things, then we can change things. But I think we have to come in, we've got to perform, we've got to show up, we've got to work hard, we've got to build the right relationships. I think, like Gopolang was saying, be accountable. Be consistent, regardless of how you feel, and it will pay off, right? And just recognizing, that everything you do is shaping how people see you. Everything you do, everything you say, everything you don't do, everything you don't say, right? And just be thoughtful and be intentional. Take time to reflect. Maybe set up a quarterly appointment with yourself and say, how am I doing? Am I doing the right things at the right time? Am I building the right relationships? I think it's really critical for us to really think about what we're doing and not just be so busy doing, but actually think about what it is that we're thinking about and what it is that we're doing. And then I'll end with Motlatsi's final point, which was you're enough. You're enough. You're smart enough. You're talented enough. You can do this. It's just a matter of putting your mind to it and actually following through with your plan, but you are enough. And we thank you so much for joining us this evening for this really fantastic conversation. And thank you to my panelists too. I really appreciate your time. And you as well, Jennifer, and the reading list people and the Jonathan Ball publishers. I'm just gonna thank everybody. Thanks everybody for making this event possible. It's been so much fun. I really enjoyed having this conversation.
Yes,
thank you so much.
Thanks, Carice. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much to the panelists for joining us, and thanks to Jonathan Ball for helping us put this together. Thanks to everyone who asked these amazing questions that we haven't had time to get to, but I think if people are reading the questions and thinking about them as well while they're watching the video, I think it's going to add to the discussion as well. So thanks to everyone who contributed there as well. And everyone go out and buy a copy of the book, Intelligence Isn't Enough. It's available at all bookstores and online. And if you haven't got yourself a copy yet, you should definitely do that, because you won't be regretting it. As you can tell from this amazing conversation, it's going to be an invaluable addition to your bookshelf. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. And thanks to Carice for writing the book.
Thanks for reading it. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, bye.
Cheers.